find me in the spot where the floppies be. Till I give it a read, keep it crisp in the sleeve. Every Tuesday night feels like Christmas Eve. Living between Wednesdays.
Ladies and gentlemen, theys, thems, everybody in between, thank you so much for coming to the Sidekick. If you have not yet bought a coffee, a drink, perhaps a comic, please do consider. I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and I'm very happy to have on with me tonight, Chip Zdarsky. Chip, thanks for coming.
Because I'm covering my mouth, I'm doing a lot of emoting with my hands.
Love it.
There you go.
For those of you who haven't seen my show, like I said, I'm Konrad of Wednesday Night Reviews. Basically, I do a YouTube show where I interview indie comic creators with the goal of basically helping them get their books funded, created, all that good stuff. Now, a lot of you might be going, but Chip Zdarsky's not an indie comics creator. You're right.
Please buy Batman.
Buy Batman. Buy Daredevil.
Sure.
Basically, I've interviewed a whole bunch of people that Chip has worked with, and basically, I'm a big fan, so I get to have fun and talk with Chip now. So yeah, with that, we're going to get going. So my first easy question I always ask everybody is simply, who is Chip Zdarsky?
It's my fake name. That's first thing. My name's actually Steve. You'd think if I picked a fake name, I'd pick a better fake name than Chip, but what are you going to do? I was a newspaper columnist for like a dozen years, and then went from one dying print industry into another as Chip Zdarsky. And that's me. I just make comics. That's all I do now.
I love it. And for my show, what I do, I like to research people, figure out who they are, come up with interesting questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. Come up with interesting questions. And a part of that history was what I found. So I checked out some of your old articles.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. The bad advice column I really liked.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So I guess one of my first questions was, given you did like newsprint, journalism, humor, stuff like that, cartooning in newsprint, what made you want to shift from that to comics?
It was accident. So I worked for a variety of newspapers, the Star, the Globe, and the Post. And I ended up at the Post as kind of just like a all-around kind of humor guy. I would do like comics and, like you said, an advice column, which they called extremely bad advice, so we didn't get lawsuits based on the advice I was giving. I kind of became like a weird like mascot for the paper for a little bit. They'd send me on weird things, like I rappelled down City Hall dressed as Spider-Man. I went undercover at a nudist resort. I went up in a biplane. I would do all the kind of the dumb stuff. And I was getting bored of it. So I was doing comics on the side. Like I put it like an issue a year or something.
Yeah.
I was friends with Matt Fraction. And if you know Matt Fraction, he was a big Marvel writer and indie writer. And I knew he was bored. He was having trouble at Marvel. And I was like, well, we should just make something together. Like, that would just be fun. Just like keep our day jobs. We'll just do something kind of stupid together. And that's when he pitched me the idea of Sex Criminals. And it was supposed to be a dumb comic that two friends worked on, and that was it. But it just kind of took off. And at that point, I was like, oh, I got to keep doing this. Like we thought we were only going to get 3 issues, and then Image was going to cancel us. But it just kept going. So I'm like, oh, okay, I've got to draw this thing now. So I was doing that and the newspaper gig full time for a year.
Yeah.
And eventually I was like, I can't do both, because I started to get Marvel work too, and I had to quit. So yeah.
Yeah, because like the last article I saw with one of the papers was your extremely bad advice. It was the last one, which was very touching and real and not funny at all.
Thank you.
I mean that in a good way. It was because it was so real is the only way I could put it. Like it made me have feelings.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And thanks. And I believe the last posted date, it was like April 2014, and I think Sex Crims came out September 2013.
Yeah.
10
years ago next week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary.
I'm ancient. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess there's so many questions I want to ask about this all, but I guess we're talking about Sex Crims now, which is a series I love. So beyond the content, the subject matter, like we could talk about sex and sexuality all day, but what I was really curious about was, given your history of writing for news, and then all the comic work you have done since, when you got that initial feedback from the audience for Sex Crims 1 and 2, and then you started running those the newsletters in the back where people could send in the news and you respond.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the initial reaction, and then how has that sort of informed how you create today?
I mean, it took us by surprise, and also like kind of a weird thing happened between coming up with the idea and the book coming out. Because when we first started talking about it, Matt was like, "Oh, I want to do like a sex comedy. Like there are movies that are sex comedies, like 40-Year-Old Virgin, you know, those kind of things,
Yeah.
which were hot at one point." He's like, and I kind of want to do that. He's also like, some like it hot, like he just likes those kind of like sexy comedies. And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds good." And then we did the solicitation. For anyone who doesn't know, in the catalog there will be some text and an image, and his solicitation was just like, dick joke fart, dick joke sex. Like that was it. It was just like, it was the crudest thing. And he was like, "We'll call it Sex Criminals." I'm like, "What? Like, what are we doing here?" And so like, by the time we actually start to make the book, we'd have these phone calls late at night about our own sexual histories and our relationships. And it was great. Like he'd put his kids to bed, and then I'd just slip off to the studio and I'd just like sit there with him and just talk about the first time I had sex. And we had these really long, deep conversations, and we talked about character at the same time. And eventually I'm just like, this is not the book that we thought we were going to do, because it became about relationships.
Yeah.
First, and then eventually about mental health. And I was so worried, because I'm like, because all the retailers and all the people were ordering this book thinking it was just going to be a dick joke book, which it also was.
Yeah.
But then we were just like, no, there's a touching story about coming of age and sexuality in this book called Sex Criminals. And so I thought everyone was going to hate it. And so Matt was in town to launch it, because we launched it at a sex club on Queen Street. It's a whole other story.
Good move.
A whole other story, my God. So he was in town, and I remember we were going to a signing at Gotham Central Comics. And on the drive, I was checking my phone. It was during it was a brief period in history where Twitter was fun. So I was looking at my phone, and like everyone was talking about it. I was like, "Oh my God, like I think this is a thing." And he was looking at his phone like, "This is a thing, like this is weird." And by the time we got to the store, there's lineups. I'm like, "Okay, this is something." And then the launch that night, we filled that sex club. Every nook and cranny, every hole of that sex club was full. I'll tell you that. And yeah, so it was very surprising. And then when the letters started to come in, well, also Matt warned me, because Matt was like, I wasn't doing comic conventions, and Matt went to a show before I experienced any of it. And he texted me afterwards. He's like, "You're not prepared for this, just so you know." Like, "What do you mean?" He's like I sat there at a table next to my wife, and these young women were coming up and getting me to sign like whips and butt plugs.
Nice.
and telling me just the dirtiest stories of their lives. Like, it's just, this is a whole other level. Like, okay, all right, it's good to know before I go into
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, once we started doing shows and getting those letters, like, a lot of it was super touching. A lot of people, like, just telling us their experiences of sexual awakening and discovering their sexuality. And, you know, we had a whole running gag through the comic about finding porn in the woods as a youngster, just pre-internet. And a lot of people told stories about that, and like how that was a weird rite of passage for a lot of kids. Years later, I was saying to a buddy, like, should we leave some in the woods for kids? Is that wrong? And we did not. I just want that to be clear on the camera. We did not leave porn in the woods. So yeah, it took off really quickly, and it was a total whirlwind. And it was always touching and always sweet. And one of the funny things was, like, when we do the first shows together, it'd be a huge turnout, but also Matt had just done Marvel stuff too. So you could see the different readers coming to the table.
Yeah.
Like, if someone was nervous and had a smile on their face and was excited, generally it was a Sex Criminals reader. If someone was not happy and they had a wheelbarrow full of books, you
Yeah.
knew it was someone with a whole run of Thor for Matt to sign. Like, it was just like that kind of thing. And I got all the good stuff because I'm just, this is all I've done. I've just done Sex Criminals, so I'm just signing books for happy fans. It wasn't until years later at Marvel I realized I am now Matt Fraction, and I'm signing books for people that don't even like the books that they're getting signed. Oh, God, my life. So, yeah.
Fascinating. I guess as sort of a follow-up to call back to the previous question about the news, do you find the way that you have to write comics, or rather the way that maybe you had to write news articles, was different than writing comics? Because I imagine with news you have to write a little more conservatively. With some of the stuff that I've read of yours, you were clearly not talking about, anal sex and all sorts of stuff, because you were covering news. I mean, there were times, but generally speaking, did you find that the audience for the news was more maybe conservative compared to comics being more centrist or leftist?
I would try and push the envelope a bit in the newspaper, and it would get me in trouble every once in a while. Like that same sex club that we did Sex Criminals in, I'd been at a couple years earlier for a film fest party.
Oh, cool.
And so I did a whole comic about it, and it was like, I got there, and it was all media types, and nothing fun was happening. So I stripped down and got in the hot tub, and I interviewed like Scott Speedman from the hot tub, and it was like, oh, this is great. And I did a whole comic on it, and comic ran, and then I got called into the editor-in-chief's office.
Oh.
And I go in, and he's like, "You gone too far this time." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Look at this picture. Like, you show a guy like grinding, because I put the little wavy lines by his buttocks. It was like him and his wife on like a DJ setup that was the front of a car. I don't know. It was like weird." I'm like, "Well, that's what he was doing. He was grinding." And I wrote grinding. And he's like, "Well, you can't do that. Like, this paper, there's a whole deal that we have with schools. Like, the paper goes to schools to promote like literacy."
Oops.
And I was just like, I was so proud of myself. And you kind of feel a little bit like Peter Parker in those moments. Like J. Jonah Jameson's like, "Parker,
Yeah.
what did you do?" And I'm like, "This is great." And we would have moments like that. I remember I did a drawing of Jennifer Love Hewitt once for the arts section. It was just Jennifer Love Hewitt. Like, there was nothing changed about her. But because it's art, the reader has a different idea of what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got a letter from this woman, Sandra Arf. I'll never forget Arf. Just like complaining about the cleavage on Jennifer Love Hewitt. And I'm like, but it's like from a photo. Like, we would have run the photo if they hadn't just got me to do the drawing. Like, it's exactly the same. But as soon as you make it a drawing, it becomes very different in their eyes. And those kind of things that we get at the paper, we would always kind of hang them around the paper. Like, think of Sandra Arf, like, would be, the saying above those. So it was conservative. We got away with a lot of stuff at the paper. But like all the stuff I would do on the side, like I'd post comics online, and they would always be like more extreme than anything I'd do in the paper, which is why I had the Chip name in the first place.
Oh, okay.
So I could keep that separate. And then Chip Zdarsky just kind of took over. So yeah.
Do you find that you think of yourself as Chip Zdarsky and not you ever? Like, does that happen, or is there still a very clear?
So first of all, I just got to say, my therapist absolutely loves it. Absolutely. Okay. It's like a clear delineation, because like in my early 20s, I got married. It was a Vegas marriage. It lasted like 6 months.
Nice. Okay.
And then after I got divorced, I came up with a Chip name, because around that time I was doing kind of my own comics.
Yeah.
And so my therapist is like, "So you divorced, changed your name and your personality to become someone new who was a bit more wild and interesting. That's what happened." I'm like, yeah, basically. So yeah.
Fascinating.
It was very weird. So the funny thing is now, there was a tug and pull for a bit, because I was never online as Steve Murray. It was always Chip Zdarsky. And then the newspaper forced me to do it.
Oh.
Because like, we're making a push for online. All right. And so all of a sudden my name was online as Steve, and I would get recognized around town as Steve.
Oh.
And then the Chip stuff took off, and I would just get recognized more as Chip.
Oh God.
So my brain would flip back and forth. At a comic event, I would respond to Chip. At a newspaper event, I would respond to Steve. To the point where a few years ago, I brought my little brother to San Diego Comic-Con, because he was a big nerd. Shout out to Big Nerds. And I was sitting there signing for a group of people, and he was 10 feet away, and he kept going like, Steve, Steve. And my head just didn't move. And as soon as he said Chip, I'm like, what?
Nice.
Like I just don't respond to Steve in a comic setting. It's very strange.
Yeah, that's really weird.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I was wondering.
It makes me so uncomfortable. Like, it's so weird. My wife joined me. There's a period where she was out of work, so she was helping me at comic conventions. She knows nothing about comics, to the point where I asked her what her favorite part was. She's like, I like the costumes. I'm like, what kind of costumes? And she was like, oh, there's a woman dressed as the Jolly Green Giant. The Jolly Green Giant? I'm like, Poison Ivy? She's like, is that what that's called? I'm like, yeah, it is. So she doesn't care for comics, and when she was there, she would handle like the lineup of people, and people kept referring to her as Mrs. Zdarsky, and it made her so mad, for a variety of reasons.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Doesn't care for it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I could get it. It's not.
I like it. I like it. I like that she doesn't care for it. Like when Sex Criminals took off, she read the first 3 issues, and then she said, I get it, and that's the last comic of mine she ever read.
Ouch.
Which is I love.
Oh,
that.
okay.
Like, that's fine. It's a totally separate world, and she keeps me in check, because there's a point a couple years ago when I was writing Spider-Man, I came in to the house, and I was so upset. She was like, what's wrong? I'm like, the Spider Office won't let me use Doctor Strange for an issue I already wrote, because Doctor Strange is on the edge of the known universe. She's like, can you listen to yourself? Like, that's not a fucking problem. So yeah, it's good to have someone keep you in check when you mentioned the Spider Office.
Yeah, little grounded reality.
A little bit, yeah, it helps. Yeah.
Now, so a lot of folks are here checking this out. They're fans of Batman, myself included. Fans of Daredevil, again, myself included.
All right.
I have, though, read a lot of your other work. I've read All Nighter. I've read Sex Crims. And one of the big questions I had was, given that Sex Crims was your first one, and it really introduced us to these extremely personal people in an extremely personal context, which is sex and sexuality.
Yeah.
When it comes to writing Batman and Daredevil and all these larger-than-life, often iconic, moral benchmark type of characters, what is sort of the difference between writing them, and how do you keep them human? Because your Bruce Wayne or your Batman feels like a person, not this archetypal character of comics.
I mean, that's kind of where you start from. Like, that's the interesting stuff. Like, Matt Murdock is a Catholic lawyer who dresses as the devil and beats people up at night. Like there's so much going on there. Like, you can't just focus on the Daredevil part. So that's kind of the entry point. Like, I've never accepted a job right away when DC and Marvel approaches me about a character. I always go, okay, I got to go and think about it. And I go and I think about it, and I start with like the human side or whatever.
Okay.
If I can figure out a story from that, then I'll say yes to the job. So even Batman, I was like, I'll go think about it. And they're like, what? You're thinking about this? Like, well, yeah, because I don't want to make a bad story. And if I can't figure out what's frail or human about it, then yeah, there's no point.
So I guess what's the time gap then between them saying, hey, do you want to write Batman or Daredevil, and you actually saying yes to those things, compared to All Nighter, for instance?
Well, the gap between saying yes or being approached and saying yes is 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Roughly. Like I need a week to kind of reread a lot of stuff, and another week to kind of think it through. All Nighter's just like, I had a dinner with Jason because we'd just done Afterlift, and that went well. And I'm just like, what do you want to do? And he kind of gave me the general idea. I'm like, okay, great. What if we graft this on there? And like, it's easier to create our own comics because you just have the back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like someone's like, come up with a comic, and you have to like think for 2 weeks about it. It starts that way, and you develop it together. It's similar to Sex Criminals, like from conversation to conversation. I mean, I guess if you're counting like beginning of conversation to like starting to draw or starting to write, it's still about 2 weeks, maybe to a month. yeah, there's also publisher negotiations and stuff like that in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine that's a whole lot of fun.
I love it.
Oh,
I actually
cool.
love negotiating because I don't care.
Oh.
Like it's pretty. I recognize I'm in a privileged position. Like Sex Criminals did well enough that I'm okay, and I don't spend money. Like I'm not a guy who's like, oh, look at me, I'm writing Batman, so I'm going to buy a Batmobile. Like I don't have any of that. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't have toys. I don't have anything like that. So I'm secure enough financially that I don't have to say yes to a thing. Like I've got to work, but I don't have to be like hustle.
Every job I have to take. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to negotiating, I'm just like, I don't care. Like it makes it very easy to negotiate when you don't care, and very frustrating for the other people.
Oh, I bet.
So yeah.
Interesting. So will you be back writing more at DC or Marvel because they just don't want to deal with you, or do they love you?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're separate departments, so that helps. Like the guy you negotiate with is over here, and the people that you write for are over here.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So yeah, that helps a lot.
Good to know.
Yeah. I think they enjoy working with me.
I hope.
Yeah, like I try to be. The fact that I'm an artist helps. When you think about Daredevil, like so many of the writers were also artists.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Brubaker was a cartoonist. Bendis was a cartoonist as well. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Frank Miller. So editors tend to like working with writers that can also draw because we're better giving feedback. We're better at knowing exactly what we want to see on the page. Whereas some writers might just be like, "Oh, draw this," and ours would be like, "What? Like you can't do that." And I seem to know how to do that. And the newspaper stuff helped because I'm used to a daily deadline. Like when I worked at the paper, sometimes a news story would break at like 2, 3 in the afternoon, and then you have to put something in the paper by 6.
Yeah.
So the speed is just like it's
Insane.
relentless.
Yeah.
An editor at the newspaper once said to me that working at a newspaper was like being on an airplane that is powered by coal that can never land. So you're always shoveling, or else the plane's going to crash, and that's because it's every day.
Yeah.
It's relentless, and it taught me to write succinctly. I remember the first things I wrote for the paper were just like 2,000-3,000 word opuses that like were just charming and delightful and full of humor and little nuggets, and they were like, no, it has to be 300 words. Like, what are you doing? And they would just cut, and I'd cry a lot. But they were right. They were super right, and because I could now write short bursts and get across what I want, it makes me more suited for comics and working with editors.
So I guess you never have the issue of having these big, beautiful pages and then throwing paragraphs on them.
Very rarely. Like, I find with Daredevil and Batman, that's when I kind of switched a bit to kind of doing inner monologue stuff. Because it suits them. Like, the grim, brooding white dude, just like, oh, the city, my soul. Like, you kind of need a bit of that. So I may have overwritten Daredevil at times. But it's a chance to be a little bit, faux poetic, I suppose, which is fun. Like my teen goth self very much
right into
that.
it.
Yeah.
Interesting. One thing I did want to ask about that fascinated me is for the new 52 run of Batman. I don't remember if it's an interview I saw or a podcast or whatever.
I won't remember.
Fair. Scott Snyder had said that when they were done the last issue, they had very intentionally sort of took all the toys, put them back in the chest, and handed it off to the next team.
What a goddamn wimp.
Okay, so there's
Scott Snyder.
There's the question. So by the time the end of your run happened on Daredevil, Daredevil is Daredevil no more.
Yeah.
Spoiler warning, I am so sorry.
Spoiler.
Was that pre-discussed with the next team, or was that you just being like, screw whoever gets this next? There it is.
It's a Daredevil thing specifically. Like any other book I left, I've kind of left the characters as they were when I started. But with Daredevil, there's a history in that book of a writer leaving the character in a position that the next writer has to pick up and kind of figure their way out of. The infamous one was like Bendis handing off to Brubaker, where he left him in prison at the end of his run. Like, here you go, here's Daredevil, enjoy. And the funny thing is, it also bit me in the ass a bit because when I was doing the handoff between Charles Soule and myself, the previous writer. I went for lunch with him, and I made a joke about how Daredevil writers always screw over the next Daredevil writer. He goes, "Yeah, that's a good idea.
Oh.
I'm going to kill Daredevil." I'm like, "What? No, I've already I've written issue 1. Like, you can't do that." So he almost did. He had him get hit by a bus and end up in the hospital. So I had to they had to do a mini series in between where he's just in a hospital for the whole mini series, and then I could start a little bit fresh. So yeah, I knew my ending early. Like, I knew it like years ago.
Oh,
where
okay.
I wanted to kind of leave the character, and so that helped a lot in terms of letting Marvel know and the incoming writer Saladin know what I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they fought against it, I would have changed it. But Saladin was
so
like,
nice.
Saladin was like, no, this is cool. Like, there's like, I didn't put him in a position where there's nothing that could come out of it. It felt like an ending. Am I spoiling anything if I say? I feel no.
Yeah,
we're good.
This is very good. Are everyone sure they're all caught up on Daredevil? Thumbs up. I love it. Thumbs up. Yeah. All right. Cool.
All right. Turns out he's Batman. No. No. I end with him as a priest, and so kind of an amnesiac priest, and he's found a place of peace because so much of the story was about violence, how it infects your life, how it infects society, and how when is it okay to use violence in a life, and having him have peace at the end, but with a hint of the old kind of Matt Murdock inside as he kind of stops a crime. I felt like a fertile soil for Saladin to kind of do something fun with that. And he totally has. Like, he kind of leaned into the priest stuff with like kind of an exorcism kind of feel right off the bat with issue 1, and I've seen his outline and it's awesome.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, it's one of the weirdest parts about writing Daredevil is I've been reading it since I was a teenager. This is the longest period I've gone without being a Daredevil reader. Like, I haven't been able to enjoy reading Daredevil because I'm writing it. Like, it's a weird thing. Like, and so now to be able to read it again as a fan, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. I forgot how much I love this book.
That is fast. I never thought about that.
It's a very specific problem to one person on the planet at any given time.
Yeah.
That you can no longer enjoy reading Daredevil. Yeah. So yeah, that was fun.
Did you do a lot of rereading while you were writing the run that you did?
I reread Brubaker and Bendis. I've been following Charles's run, so I was already caught up on that. And Wade's was close enough in my memory that was fine. And Nocenti's run is my favorite run of all time, probably in all of comics. Nocenti, Darmida Jr., Al Milgrom. Oh, beautiful. So like that's burned into my head. So yeah, that was in that 2-week period of trying to decide if I should take the job.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Now, one thing, because I guess we're going down a Daredevil hole here, because Daredevil, the series at large that you made was so politically minded when it came to how Fisk was working, how the two business tycoons came in and sort of doing what they were doing. Fisk wanted to become a politician. Yeah. It dealt with levels of police and police brutality and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Had your work in time in the newspapers helped inform how to write that so that it felt right, or has it been long enough now that it's departed and you can just do you?
It's more about the newspaper taught me how to research.
Oh.
So like before I started writing Daredevil, I would read a bunch of books about violence, and then as I was kind of going into it, I read a ton of articles about different ways of handling a prison system and the problems inherent, and the prison abolition movement. So I did my best to make sure that I kind of knew what I was doing before I actually kind of got to the step for writing it. So the newspaper definitely kind of trained me to do that, because you also got to research quickly the newspaper.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we got to kind of do this now. So yeah.
Fascinating. Now, when obviously for me from Daredevil to Afterlift, who hasn't read Afterlift here? It's okay. Put
How
your hand.
dare you?
I need to know. I don't want to be a bad person. So like 3 of you, 4. Okay, cool. So in Afterlift, you deal with basically, and you don't call it Uber, but an Uber driver.
Sure.
Basically dealing with heaven and hell.
Yeah.
How had the research and that kind of story impacted what you wanted to do with Daredevil? Because very clearly there's a line between like heaven and hell, super Catholic dude.
Okay, this is gonna be really weird, but Afterlift came about because I started writing Daredevil, and so the artist on it, Marco Cicchetto, he's amazing, beautiful work, and right off the bat we butted heads a bit about color.
Oh.
A lot of the times the colorist on his work would do things very shiny, and I'm just like, no, this is supposed to be gritty and grim. Like, not everything should sparkle, basically.
Yeah.
And then we were doing scenes at night, and it was all very blue. And I'm like, no, it's too cold. Like, it's Hell's Kitchen. It's got to feel warm. And I knew the look I needed, so I ended up. It's a Michael Mann look, basically, and so I ended up renting Collateral.
Oh, okay.
Which is, for anyone that doesn't know, it's like Tom Hanks and Jamie Foxx. Tom Hanks basically commandeers his cab and takes him around the city while he commits these atrocities. And so I picked that because I knew Michael Mann had shot it in a way where there's a lot of orange and green in LA at night, which really gives you a real sense of like heat and sweating.
Yeah.
And so that's what I watched that so I could take screen grabs and I could show Marco what I'm thinking. Oh. So when we brought the colorist in, we know what to do. But as I'm watching it, I'm just like, oh wow, like Tom Cruise is like a demon. He's like the devil in this cab. And I was like, oh, that would be fun. And then it was like, that's how it kind of
that's so cool.
Started. And then I contacted Jason Lowe, who's like, he's a Toronto legend at this point, a Pitiful Human Lizard.
Where is it?
Yeah. So
he drew this.
We've done a couple of books together now. He was at a point where he wasn't vibing much with comics. He'd had a few kind of run-ins with like local publishers that kind of left a sour taste in his mouth. But he was so good. And I was just like, hey, you know how to draw cars? He's like, not really. Oh. And like, would you want to attempt it? And like, Jason's amazing. Within a week, he knew how to draw cars. Like he was just like,
go Jason.
They went from like kind of clunky things to like perfectly rendered cars.
Yeah.
Like, practice. Yeah. It makes me so upset when like young people just like figure out how to do a thing where it takes me like years. So that's how that kind of came about. And I did a ton of research into that one because I was dealing with basically kind of all religions and all concepts of an afterlife and trying to figure out what I could pick from to make this work.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, on the end of Jason, maybe for more of All Nighter, because it's for those of you who don't know who haven't read All Nighter, really cool book. It's basically about actually you're here. Can you give them a quick synopsis of All Nighter?
Well, first, it's very funny because I asked Jason what he wants to do next. He said, no superheroes. I'm like, okay. I'm like, so what are you thinking? He's like, I was thinking like a diner run by vampires. I'm like, that's cool. They were also superheroes because I'm an idiot. Because I kind of recognized that there was a way to do it that'd be fun and interesting. So it's about this diner of vampires where one of the younger vampires is bored with this existence. Yep. And but you can't reveal to the world that you're a vampire. So one night he like stops a crime and he puts on like a basic costume and realizes, oh, if I disguise myself, then I won't get in trouble because there's a whole set of rules for monsters. You can't show yourself or else you get taken away. And so the whole thing became kind of about fictions and how fictions come to life. Very Neil Gaiman-y on one level, just like, oh, a story is as real as, you want it to be, and blah, blah, blah. Magic is in a name, and, that's my Neil Gaiman impersonation, I guess. I don't know. So it became about kind of all the kind of paranormal creatures discovering that by pretending to be superheroes, they can get away with being out in the open. Yeah. All of a sudden you have like an ogre dressed as like Dr. Octopus or something, So super fun and just an opportunity to see Jason draw like cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because I've previously interviewed him and just talked with him in passing, and he mentioned he doesn't super want to do superheroes, and I even asked him.
And now he's like writing every second series at Marvel. So come on, right? Jason, pick a lane.
So just for me, if you would be so kind.
He's unboxing right now like superhero action figures and like and trading cards and stuff. He's so into superheroes. Nice try, Jason.
You did it. You started it.
Sure,
you got him drawing a a superhero, and now he's like, you know
No,
what?
it was Marvel saying, "Do you have any interest in Multiple Man?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Jason, I don't know if it's famously, infamously, has a beautiful cosplay of Multiple Man, and now he's getting to write it, which is great.
I know, it's wild.
So do me a favor for the next chunk of All Nighter.
Yeah.
Instead of cars, make him draw horses and fences.
Ooh, I like it. He just gets so good at it, I'd be angry again.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So when it comes to sort of the way you approach writing, one thing that I'd like to ask writers is, the unfortunate bit of comics is you can pump out a script, or probably 10 or 20 of them, within a fairly short period of time.
First of all, I like that as my creative process. Pump out a script.
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of that happened with Sex Crims, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
So you can generate these scripts fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And then some unfortunate artist has to draw armies of, ninjas and
yes, it's true.
monsters and all sorts of villains that Batman has to fight.
Yeah.
So there's a gap between, right? There's writing, you're done, and now the artist gets to do their thing, and it takes quite a while. Given you've written so much, do you ever feel disconnected with what wrote by the time it comes out, by the time that fans come by and they're like, hey, I love this run, this is great, you were talking about blah blah blah, I really connected with it, and are you like, that was me like 8 years ago or 4 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, the turnaround in comics is pretty quick, really. Like sometimes it's like 3 or 4 months between like finishing the script and a book coming out.
Mm-hmm.
There are some projects, like I've got a project coming up with Marvel where I wrote scripts back in 2019, and it's going to be coming out in January. Now that's a different thing. It was a totally different world.
Oh, okay.
It was like pre-COVID. So I was writing people just getting sick all the time and loving it.
Ooh.
So it was like, that's going to be interesting having that come out, because I'm going to feel like that's written by a different person. But for the most part, it's so quick, the turnaround.
Okay.
Though I will say, there was a period a couple years ago where, you write things out of order, and some things, maybe take a year to come out, some 3 months. There was maybe 1 or 2 weeks of comics that were coming out where I had 3 issues come out close together, in which they all had a scene at a funeral in the rain with a mysterious person standing on the edge of the funeral. Like, I can't tell you how much of a hack I felt like when I realized that. Like, even on its surface, one of those is bad enough. The fact that I had 3 in 3 different comics because I had to write them at different stages. Yeah, that happens.
Nice.
No, not nice.
Fair.
Not nice.
So, talking about like making comics, sometimes the delay and things like that. One thing that has sort of come up, other interviews in passing, stuff like that I've talked with other creators about, is comic books as a medium, how they're created, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what I'm interested to hear from you, because you've kind of dabbled in a lot. You've done more what I would call indie stuff. Substack contacted you. You were able to make some series through them and then get it published to Dark Horse. And now you've done DC and Marvel. So you've worked at like all levels of comics here. When it comes to more recent developments, I'm finding where Kickstarter is becoming popular, even for the major companies.
Yeah.
Sometimes artists and creators are just teaming up and being like, hey, here's our imprint, here's our company, like Distillery. Yeah. How do you feel about that? And I guess, do you see comics changing now that you've been in so much of it in different levels?
I mean, things kind of come and go. I've only been doing it like 10 years, really. And you see companies kind of make moves and shifts, and, some will disappear, some will pop up, some will have money behind them, some won't. As long as people kind of figure out a way to make comics. I'm cool with all of it. I mean, Image is the ideal kind of deal in comics, because they don't really take a lot of money. They don't own your thing. They have a basic fee per issue to cover their costs.
Fair.
The only thing Image owns is that little eye.
That's
it. That's the only thing they have a trademark on, is that. So it's the best spot for creators to kind of like to do well on their own, but also like because they don't own anything and they make minimal money, they don't have a big overhead, so it's a bit harder for them to kind of like do more kind of outreach for comics. Whereas maybe Distillery might have some money behind them, so they can like get articles places and get people excited about a thing maybe a bit easier because they got the funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they pay for advertisements, marketing, as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah,
to.
yeah. Whereas I find with Image, like they do a certain amount of that, but also it's more incumbent on the creators to like contact people to go on podcasts or contact the trades to kind of get a story in there.
Cool.
Yeah, you're always. It's a thing. There's not a lot of money in comics. Like there really isn't.
Yeah.
Like anyone that's in it isn't there to get rich. They're there because they love making books, which means they have to be the ones that are kind of hustling to one get the jobs, and
Fair.
also promote the jobs as well. Because a career in comics can be very very short.
Yeah.
Like if you look historically, like
Yeah.
there aren't a lot of happy endings to creators, especially within the Marvel DC system.
Yeah.
There are
There's
a
whole
few
foundations for that. Yeah.
yeah, but even like the ones that are successful are miserable, like or angry at Marvel.
Yep.
So yeah, you kind of have to you always have to be hustling, promoting yourself, and I think a modern creator has to look at the fact that they've got a shelf life of like 5-10 years.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's usually kind of how it goes, especially with writers. Like people either get sick of your shtick. There might be like, this guy writes too many scenes at funerals in the rain. People just get burnt out. Maybe start producing not as quality stuff. Run out of ideas. Like
Fair.
because the turnover is so much. Like you think of screenwriters, like okay, I wrote like 20 screenplays, and that's a beautiful, brilliant career.
Yeah.
I'm writing 20 issues of comics, every year. That's a lot of stories, and I'm going to run out of stories, or I'm rehashing stories. And like, oh yeah, he's the guy that does this kind of story over and over again. Yeah, like I know I'm going to be done soon.
Interesting.
It might not be my choice. It might just be the companies being like, yeah, you don't sell anymore. No one likes your stuff anymore. So it happens. It happens to anyone. If you open up any comic in the 90s and start looking at the names in there, you're just like, oh, where are they now? A lot of them have moved on to better things, and that's cool. Or things that made on the surface not seem better, but they're actually better careers and better for their home life. Like, because that's another thing. Like, so many people just have like miserable families because all they do is work.
Mm-hmm.
Not to go on too much, but like, I remember a few years ago I was at a convention, and there was a comic artist there that I used to love their stuff in the 80s, and I hadn't seen their work in a long time, and we were taking like a shuttle back to the hotel, and I was like, so what have you been up to? And he was like, well, I worked at Marvel for a while, and then they just stopped calling me, basically. Like, kind of moved my way down the characters, and I wasn't in vogue enough, so they were going to take my house at that point. So I looked in the paper, and there was a job listing that said, learn computers on the job. And I contacted them, and it was like a shipping company, and he never turned a computer on at that point, and he just kind of rose up, and now he's like was their head of IT. Oh. And on the weekends, he just does comic conventions with his wife because it's fun to revisit that and make extra money drawing Galactus or whatever. Like, that actually sounds pretty ideal to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like he probably have more job security in that position. He checked off the childhood dream box, drawing Spider-Man. He found security for himself and keeping his house. And on the other end of it, he gets to experience kind of the love of fans and without the pressure of having to have the paycheck.
Yeah, no deadline in the background, no. Yeah, because you're covered. You're good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and again, it
feels grim, but it's like it's. I find that story actually like, I love that story because like the sad version of that is where he just kept chasing that,
mm-hmm.
and just couldn't make ends meet and like never spent time with his loved ones and things fall apart. But recognizing, okay, I've got to make a change. Yeah.
When this interview started, right? Because again, I researched you quite a bit to be able to do this, and I'm a fan and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that sort of clicked in my brain was like, Chip's like kind of a weird guy, but like really deep. And I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna get out of you today. I was like, this could go really strange. Like I said, I thought you might have shown up in a Flash costume or something.
It's in storage. I would have done it, but I just moved back. It's in storage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that I'm getting the retrospective, thoughtful, interesting part. Because I think that's what, for me anyway, has made a lot of your writing interesting, is you've taken steps to take characters who are Batman, larger than life, literally archetypal for the genre, and made them feel very human. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
I guess one thing that I was curious about, just based on what we were talking about, is other indie creators I've talked to who don't do it full time. They do it as part time, as weekend, just kind of like you were describing. I've asked them, I was like, would you want to do it full time? If someone like turned around and said, hey, here's a contract for the next year, we're going to pay you X number of dollars, just draw, just write. And they were like, no, I'd rather kickstart my comics, work my day job, all that kind of stuff. Do you think maybe the way that comics gets made might shift to something more like that, where more and more indie creators pop in, do it as a weekend gig, pump out a couple of comics over a couple of years, and then go, you know what? I made my book. I got to meet who I wanted to meet. Maybe I got picked up and did a cool run on this, and then had my time.
It's a nice way to maintain the love of a thing, because, not saying it's happened to me, but I've definitely seen it amongst other comic creators where they just don't like comics anymore. If you're doing it full time all the time, and like you're negotiating and navigating like politics and stuff within the companies, you can become a very jaded kind of version of yourself, especially with the history of the companies. I talk about it a lot in kind of public domain of them, retaining ownership and stuff, and people getting screwed over. And that feeling will ramp up to 11 if that's your only job, right?
Yeah, goes from something fun and a hobby and passion to work.
Yeah, but if it's like your side thing, like, I don't know, I'm no happier now writing Batman than I was hand selling Monster Cops or whatever at comic conventions to like maybe 300 people max. The joys in the process of it, and the joys in just like kind of individual connections with people when you do see them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think that enjoyment that you get is why you tend to write things more personal, like Sex Crims, like All Nighter, which I find are these small but big stories?
I mean, maybe. Yeah, I suppose so. It's hard for me to kind of analyze why I do what I do.
Yeah, let's psychoanalyze you right now, real quick, eh? No problem.
But I mean, I'm writing the stories I want to read. Like, if I write something I don't want to read, then I think it would come across as kind of fake.
Fair.
But yeah, I'm interested in people, whether they have a cape on or they have vampire fangs or whatever, or just like beautiful, depressed Catholic hunks like Matt Murdock. It's what I want to read about. Yeah,
I dig it. We've got like 5 minutes left. So classically, I end my interviews the same way. I have about 3 questions I can swap between. And I feel like you're gonna have a really cool answer for this one. So
not then.
People who create comics often also read comics like yourself, and hence they collect comics and graphic novels and figures and paraphernalia and memorabilia and all sorts of stuff. So I always like to ask, basically, what is the thing in your collection, whether it's, and maybe not the most expensive, maybe not the most rare,
No,
or
let's
whatever.
go with most expensive.
But what's the thing that makes you happy when you get to see it?
Okay, so one of the things about my studio is I don't collect action figures, statues, anything. I don't collect anything really. I've got like a shelf of books and that's it. To the degree that there was a reporter once over at my studio to do a story on me, and in their story they went on about like, I'm in this studio full of like paintings and books and toys and action figures. I'm like, what? I don't have a single goddamn action figure in this place. I was so mad. But the one thing I have that still brings me joy is I did buy a Captain America shield for paintball.
Oh, nice.
Me and my buddies were gonna do paintball in the woods, and I showed up with this Captain America shield. And it is so satisfying running through the woods and hearing the explosion of paintballs on a shield. Oh, I treasure it. So when I brought it back to the studio, it's all beat up, kind of stained a little bit and all scratched because I also tried to throw it at people.
Oh!
um, but I hung that on the wall, and I think I love that because one, I think it's a cool design, but also it just reminds me of having fun with my friends.
It's so
Yeah.
cool. So not that I think I need to ask this question, but for the folks that are here, for the folks that are at home on YouTube, maybe watching this, I don't know, 100 years from now,
Sure.
where's the best place that they can follow you to get the most updated news, to get glimpses of whatever you're working on? What's the best place they can check you out?
Oh God, my website is okay. So my company name, because at some point I had to come up with a company. So I came up with Zdarsky Inc. So stupid, but then I realized that .co is a web address. So Zdars.co brings you to everything Chip Zdarsky.
I love it.
So stupid.
And your newsletter, which
Yeah.
again, if is anyone here not following it? Cool. We can skip that part.
Perfect.
So everyone's on the newsletter, which is great. Then I guess my last sort of question for tonight would simply be, who do you think all these fine people, and who do you think I should interview next? Who is that person?
Oh my God! In Toronto too, because we're not flying them in.
I mean,
I don't know what kind of
I can
money
do it
your
online.
YouTube show has.
Yeah,
flying people in.
I can do it online. I'd prefer Canadian, but who could use a signal boost right now?
Oh, I don't know. All my friends are so successful. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Oh man, really on the spot now. Because I do keep thinking to people like, well, they're actually too successful, I think, for.
I mean, I'm
the
okay
signal
with
boost.
that. Who do you think would be interesting?
Kate Beaton is always interesting, especially if you get a couple drinks in her and her like East Coast accent comes out and you can't understand her. Ramon Perez, because we did Stillwater together, and the fact that he kind of runs a studio here in town that I founded, that he basically stole from me. It'd be interesting to ask him about that, to see, what his
Just
deal
grill him
is.
for you?
Yeah. I know you've already interviewed Allison, right?
Yep.
Shout out to Allison O'Toole, my
Editor extraordinaire.
extraordinaire. Yeah, she's the best. And you already did Jason, another local legend.
Yeah.
So many local legends. Yeah, I think Ramon, that'd be interesting.
Well, as a kicker, I ran into him at the Guelph Comics Jam, and he said
Okay.
he was down. So
Yeah.
that'll probably be the next one.
There
Then.
you go. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sweet.
Then in that case, ladies, gentlemen, theys, thems, everybody else, if you have not bought any of this man's books, I don't know why you're here, honestly. If you don't have, if there's one of these that you're missing, please pick them up. These copies, Chris, these are all for sale, right? Yeah. Awesome. And Chris, you've got more copies elsewhere for people to pick up. Thumbs up. Awesome.
Woo.
They're right over there. Please. Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. I've got a few. I know some people have figures and comics to sign.
Yeah.
So absolutely, please do that. And if you're at home from the internet and enjoying, remember, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for joining us, Chip.
Thank you. Yay. Thanks, everyone.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Yeah. Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it. True believer, not lying. Always up for an awesome summer crossover tie-in. High flying, full color or black and white. Splash pages, flashbacks. Whet your appetite with new costumes, team ups, first loves, first appearances.